Good morning, everyone. So we did a study together with the colleagues from Burundi, and I want to acknowledge the people from Burundi who are on the list. And the study was also done by Andrea Steves, in fact from Colombia, works in Brazil, but did an internship in our institute for 6 months. So Burundi is a relatively small country here in Africa, between Tanzania and the Democratic Republic of Congo, south from Uganda and Rwanda. And it's in Pool 4, the Eastern Africa, where we know that OA, Z1 and Z2 is circulating. Z3 has not been described there so far in Burundi. We know that it is in Pool 6. And the last reported outbreak in Burundi was in 2013, but no information about serotypes. Like have been said, there was a meeting of the roadmap of PCP in July, and they classified themselves as being now moved from stage 1 to stage 2. So it's also an economy, and there's a lot of smallholders, a lot of nomadism and semi-nomadism and transhumance according to the seasonal cycle, so meaning a lot of movement in this country. Yep. Okay, so the study started because there was a reported outbreak, not officially to OIE or something, but locally reported outbreak in March in 2016. And so there was a wish to do clinical surveillance, also again a targeted surveillance, nothing to do with trying to determine the prevalence or something, a target surveillance where there was clinical signs or a history of clinical signs. And there were also samples taken for analysis on a serological or virological way. So the local authorities said that it was most probably, introduced from Tanzania in the province of Burundi, and I will show you in the next slide where it is. There were 423 cows were reported as affected with foot and mouth disease. There is no vaccination going on in Burundi. And the control measures were closing the markets, banning transhumance and ranging grazing, and a quarantine station in the province of Cankuzo. How far those measures are followed up, it's another thing. So these are the provinces where samples were taken. So this is the province where the report was of the 423 animals. Samples were taken also in Cankuzo, where they put up a quarantine station. Also to have samples from the east. There were samples taken in Rutana, from the central, also in Maro, and then more to the Democratic Republic of Congo, here in Cibitoke and Bubanza. And the samples that were taken were mainly oral lesions or hoof lesions in those provinces where there were clinical signs, where there were a clinical history but no clinical signs anymore. There was saliva taken, and there was serology taken in all provinces, also in Maro, but those samples were lost in some way. So there were 184 samples from vesicular lesions, and so 173 for blood, so some samples were lost. This is the age structure of the animals where samples were taken. We did the serology, the NSP, the solid phase competition, PCR, a 3D gene target PCR with an internal and external control, virus isolation, where virus isolation was difficult, we tried to do electroporation, and for typing we did antigen-ELISA, serotype-specific PCR, and sequencing. So what were the results? So we first did the NSP ELISA to have an idea, did they had contact or not? And if you can see here, the blue bars are the animals that were sampled, and the red bars are the positives. So you could see that we had a quite high degree of NSP positive from the animals that were sampled. So then we did the solid phase, the structural protein ELISA, and this is is what we see. So this is by province, and these are the different serotypes. So we are also aware that you get a lot of cross-reaction between the serotypes, so we focused on the dominant seroprevalence. So we can see that in 3 provinces there was a dominant serotype of SET2 serology reaction. So this is here in where the 400 cattle were reported, and then in those 2 provinces there was mostly SET2. We have unfortunately no results from this, but then we see that in this province here we have dominant serology of type O, and here of type A, which is interesting. So then we looked at the PCR, and we can see that we found PCR positives mainly in this province, here, not here anymore, where the 400 were reported, but in this province, and not here, but here. There were also quite some PCR positives. If you look at the samples, so the positives were mostly from gum lesions, mouth lesions and hoof lesions, not in the saliva. To me, that doesn't mean that saliva is not a good sample. It's only because the saliva came from those provinces where there was a history, but no more clinical signs. So to me, it means that there was no more virus excretion in those animals that had a history of clinical signs. If we now look at the CP value, telling you something about the virus load, you can see, for example, in this province, that we had a lot of animals with a low CP value, meaning a high virus load, meaning to me that there was certainly an acute outbreak going on. We also find here in this province some animals with a high virus load, some others with low virus load, and the same here in CB Toke. So this mixture, and here also, this mixture means whether there was already a long time going on because there were some low virus loads, or that was starting up. So, but if you try to remember that we could find high virus load in this province, this one, and if we then go to the virus isolation, these are exactly the provinces where we could isolate the virus. And so these are the provinces where we could isolate the virus. And interesting enough, here we could isolate SET2, here also, but also virus foot-and-mouth disease type A. So here there were 2 viruses at the same time going on in the same region. If we then look at the sequence, and we first looked at a study that was done by Matthew Hall, Nick, and other colleagues, and where they looked at the SET2 in Africa, and they mainly divided the SET2 in 2 big groups. One group from genotype 1, 2, 3, and 4, and the other groups, genotype 5 to 13. When we looked at the SET2 that we could isolate from Burundi, it belongs to this genotype 4, which fits into the story of what is going on in this region. So these are those 2 groups, genotype 1, 2, 3, and 4, and the others. And then if you look in more detail, it belongs to genotype 4, and even more in detail, you can see that the isolates from Burundi were almost all the same, although they come from different provinces and different parts of the country. They were quite similar, and they were similar, connected to outbreaks that were in the past in Tanzania, Uganda, Kenya. So they belong to that group of ecosystem in that part of Burundi, in that part of Africa. Then we looked at the A strain, and we know from the literature that genotype 1 is circulating in this area. The Burundi strains that we isolated are also belonging to genotype 1. Again, mostly related to strains from Tanzania, Kenya, and others from that region. So more in detail. So, in summary, based on the profile, what we try to do is to look at the profile. So if you look at the serology, NSP, and the structural protein serology, and if you combine that with the PCR, with the CP values from the PCR, and with the virus isolate, there was probably an introduction in this province, which is now over, and there is no virus circulation excretion anymore in this province, but probably the virus spread this way to Rutana and Cankuzo, and the other way to the center, and even to there. And there is another strain. We have evidence that there is another strain circulating, coming from Congo, or in that region, circulating in the whole region, which is the A strain. And we have some indication that there was an older outbreak going on with an O strain, where there is no circulation anymore with the O strain. So that were our preliminary findings, what we have from Burundi, and we hope that this can add to the knowledge of what is going on in this region. So thank you for your attention.